Hey guys, Stealth here. Today looking at a USSR Mechanized deck. This one was sent in by Jjia, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a Soviet mechanized deck, and he said that he tried to base this deck around the Scandinavian mechanized deck that I reviewed a few weeks or days back. Now, I think that this was the mechanized Scandinavian deck that I did the Mad Dash video with. It's the deck that was designed to capture and hold towns and push up quickly using transports like the armed transports like the STRF 1940, for example. He says, I haven't gotten a specific goal. It's not specifically meant for any game type, but I notice it works best in high point games because of the expensive transports I used. Now, he wants me to help him improve this deck, as this is the first deck that he made himself, and if I just have some general tips for building decks. Jjia, first of all, congratulations on building your first deck. It is something that is a very crucial part of Wargame, as it determines what kind of units you're going to bring, how they are going to respond, and how they are going to impact your gameplay. So feel free to change this deck whenever you like, as I always look at deck reviews and see how I would play and if I do or do not like the unit. Don't let anyone tell you your deck is wrong, just that there are some personal choices or preferences or map specific changes that they might make. With that being said, let's have a look at what he brought in. He has some command infantry. Good choice if you want to capture a town. It really depends on the map. Some maps feature buildings on town or on command zones. Some of them only have a forest. So you might have to cover these things into a forest, and the Ural, while it's not the best transport, it will get the job done. It'll make it very cheap. Normally a command infantry unit is going to cost you 125 or somewhere in that region, depending on the transport. But the Ural is nice and cheap, and it's only going to cost you 105 points. Next up, a FOB, an MI6, some logistics trucks. Let's see if these are the best we can get, and I'm afraid that it is. The 4330 carries 300 more supplies than the 375D. And the MTLBs, while they are amphibious, they carry a low amount of supplies. But if you want something that has a bit of armor, go with the MTP-LB. I think that for this deck, the Ural is perfectly fine. And then he has some BMP-1K transports, or actually not transports. BMP-1Ks or BMP-1s are usually transports, but in this case, they're command vehicles. You get 4 of these. They have a bit of armor, although not a lot, while they can sustain some artillery shelling. Try not to keep these things at the front line. That's not what they're designed to do. Make sure you have a significant line of infantry and or tanks before bringing these things in. Now, mechanized, so that means a ton of infantry. And holy shit, he has a lot of infantry. Let's see. He has 36 Motostrelki 90, and then another 9 in the BMP-3. Now what I would do with a deck like this is get a variety of transports, because the transports are almost as important, or in some cases even more important than the infantry that they're ferrying in. It would, for example, not be very useful to have 36 BMP-2s, because they all do the same job. They got a concourse and they got a 2A42 autocannon. What I would do here is go for the BMP-1D, at least for one of the cards. That way I have the AGS-17 grenade launcher for anti-infantry, the 2A28 Grom for anti-vehicle. I know it's not terribly accurate, or it's terribly inaccurate with 20%, but it is a main gun. And you can use that to kill off vehicles, of course, if it hits. And even some tanks, as the armor penetration on this thing is 12. Then you have the BMP-2, where you have the concourse and the autocannon. So the autocannon more versus vehicle warfare, and the concourse HGM for tank killing. With that you have a bigger variety, and you could go for the BMP-2D if you want to. It's always kind of hard to compare these two, as I'm going to be constantly hovering over them. The BMP-2D has a bit more armor. It has 3 front, 3 side versus 2 front and 2 side. They do fire both the concourse and the 2A42. And let's see, I think the 2A42 is exactly the same accuracy as well. Yeah, that doesn't matter. If you want a more accurate version, go for the BMP-2 1986, as this one has an accuracy of 25% versus 15. And the Concours has been upgraded to a Concours M for only 5 points more for the transport. And then there's the BMP-3, which is definitely one of my favorite transports. The Arcan, the 2A70 and the 2A72. This vehicle is pretty much a BMP-T, but it transports infantry and it doesn't have a ton of armor. BMP-T has, I think it was 15 frontal armor. Let's have a look. If you can get it in this deck, that is. Yeah, here it is. 15 frontal armor. You can see it's exactly the same vehicle. It also carries the same weaponry, although I'm not sure about the AGS-17. That has been replaced by the Arcan on this vehicle. So I'm going to first off delete all the Motostrelkis in here, and the reason for that is that when I have a bit of quick oversight, I want to see what kind of units he has, or I have in this deck, to make sure that I don't have a Motostrelki unit there, and one there, because it's going to confuse you. It's going to not make it clear what kind of units you have. Now, first off, BMP-1D, to make sure I have a grenade launcher in here. I don't think I'll be needing 36 plus infantry units, especially because we also have Spetsnaz and Sappery in here. So I'm going with 13 veterans. Then, the BMP-2. You also get 13 of these, and you get 9 of these, because they are slightly better with their Concours M and the 2A42. I'm not going to use these as an anti-tank vehicle. I will use the BMP-3 for that. So instead, I'm going with the BMP-2 or the 2D. Let's see. Yeah, that doesn't impact availability at all. So let's go with the BMP-2D, another 13 of those. And then the BMP-3. Now, I don't think we can get VDVs in this deck, which is unfortunate. And nor can we get the Morskaya Picota. So with that, we're going to have to go for the Motostrelki 90 if we want to get the BMP-3. And I'm going to get, let's see, 9 of these. Reason is that I want to have that accuracy on the Arcan and the main weapon systems, like the 2A70 and the 2A72, a bit higher. And for that reason, a veterancy bonus of veteran will make it so that your accuracy is going to go up even more. So that's as far as the infantry concerned. I now no longer have 2 cards of BMP-2s, because that's going to be too singular. But if you're dealing with infantry, bring the BMP-1D. If you're dealing with more vehicles, BMP-2D. Tanks, BMP-3. Always when you're starting out, try to go with the lowest end vehicle. This is going to cost you 35 points for your infantry plus vehicle package. This is going to cost you 50 points. So keep in mind that this thing is quite a bit more expensive. Next up, let's have a look at the ATGMs that he has in here. He has the Concours M. And he has the Concours Base. I'm not sure why he went with both of these. Because if I'd have a choice to pick, I would always go with the Concours M. Because the accuracy is better and armor penetration is better. Although you could say that the accuracy and armor penetration on the Concours are well enough. But for 5 points more, you can get more armor penetration, better accuracy, and well, exactly the same transport, so you don't really have to look at that. But I would go with the Concours M. And again, these Concours are a bit spread out. I think that he built his deck and revisited the infantry tab afterwards to make sure he had everything and filled up slots of activation points. So let's delete both of these Concours and let's go with the Concours M. And I think that having 8 of these should be enough. With veteranry bonuses, I'm also going to buff this accuracy a little bit more to make sure that I'm going to be in the 60% hit range, I think. Plus 24% accuracy. Keep in mind, not 24% plus, so it's not 74. It's 24% of 50. So 10% of 50 is 5. 24%, it makes it about 62%, 65, depending also on the range. And what kind of target you're firing at. If you're firing at a big tank, or big target like a tank, you're much more likely to hit. Versus if you're firing, for example, at a BRDM-2, which is a very small reconnaissance vehicle, it's much more difficult to hit. But it's going to be about the 60% mark. Next up, AA. He has 1 card of Igla Ens. I would like to get another one, but they're prototyped, unfortunately. Nice amount of accuracy on these. Range would have been nicer if it had been 2600 or 2800 even, but you don't get that on manpads. Or actually maybe the Scandinavian countries do have some, like the RBS 90. Anyway, 5HE. Again, the MT-LBV, we're going to see this transport a lot. And he only has one card of these. He also has some Sapri 85, which, while they are nice units, are completely redundant if you already have the Spetsnaz. So what I'm going to do here is throw out the Sapri, throw out the Igla as well, to make sure that I can group up my Igla in the deck editor. Going with 7 Igla ends, and then some base Iglas, to make sure that I have a good amount of AA infantry. And then there's the Spetsnaz, of course. You don't get a lot of options. You get the Mi-24D or the Mi-24A. I would prefer going with the Mi-24D version because it has slightly better weaponry. Especially considering that... oh, sorry, I cannot compare this, of course. The Mi-24A has a standard machine gun, the NSVT. And this one has the Yak-B. It also has the Falanga ATGM with 30% accuracy and 13 armor penetration. Keep in mind, that's almost as good or as bad as the M72 Law used by the American infantry. Except that this thing does have a significant better range, of course. The Mi-24D has a missile that has more accuracy and more armor penetration, so we're going to go with these. He has 2 of these at Elite, and that should be well enough to kill out any infantry in a town. Just make sure you escort them with a couple of Mototroki 90. Because if you do encounter something that spews grenades at you, for example, you want to be able to kill it. And the Spetsnaz with their RPO Rice cannot do that. You need an RPG-7 VR or an RPG-7 to do that. So that's the infantry tab. Moving on to support. A lot of AA here. 3 cards of AA. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just would like to have some more long-range AA. So what I'm going to do here is delete 1 Strela right away, because Strelas themselves are not bad units, but they don't have a good range against airplanes. What you can go for in this situation is the Cub M, to make sure that you have a long-range anti-airplane defense, 4.5 kilometers. Their accuracy is good enough, and their availability is pretty low. So in this situation I usually go for 4 trained, to make sure I can make 2 groups of 2, spread those out over my front lines, and I have a significant anti-air coverage. Just keep in mind they are radar guided, so if a seaplane drops by uninvited, it is going to kill off one of these things if you don't have the radar disabled. Next off, Nonas, of course, nice mortars. You could go with a Vasilex if you want a bit more artillery fire, because these things fire a lot faster than the Nonas. These have a rate of fire of 9, these have a rate of fire of 20. But I would still pick Nonas, and I did try the Vasilex, but I just couldn't really work with them because their HE value is only 3 versus 5 on the Nona, and that's why I prefer the Nona. Then he has 3 Tungushkas. I think that is not enough. Let's compare these quickly to show you what the difference is. The main gun has exactly the same specs. You don't really have to look at that. The real difference comes from this weapon. The 9M311M. I'm not sure why they just couldn't give it a code name like Stinger. But, okay, it's a long-range surface-to-air missile. But the range on the Tunguska M is better than the range on the base Tunguska. This has a range of 3,300 meters. And a range of 2,975 meters is going to make a significant difference. The Tunguska M can safely engage helicopters at maximum range, like the Apache longbow, which cannot pick off the Tunguska before it gets into range. The Tunguska is going to be right on the edge of its missile range. If, for example, the longbow flies in, it's going to have to come in pretty close, get into within 2,800 meter range, which is also the main gun range, and then you can also use the main gun and this weapon. The difference is that you get a little bit more pricey units. You get 100 versus 85. But in this situation I would still go with the Tunguska M, but put them at trained, because their accuracy is already good enough, and you want to have the higher availability here. And these Strela M should also help out nicely with AA defense. Again, they got good enough base accuracy that I'm going to downvet these to 7 to make sure I have enough AA units. Moving on to tanks, let's see what he has here. You don't get the huge tank deck, or the tank shop, if you will, that you could if you were using an armored deck. And actually I prefer that, because you got this huge T72 line, you got the T80 line, all these different varieties of tanks. I think it's all terribly confusing. That may not sound very professional, but the difference between those tanks is so small that I'd rather have a smaller selection, something like this, which makes it easier to avoid analysis paralysis, which is where you keep analyzing units, keep saying, well, this one has 5 kph more speed versus 2 points of armor penetration and 1 point of hit points. No thank you. I'll just stick with a selection as big as this. Let's see. He has some medium tanks, T-55 AMVs, Bastion missiles, good missiles, not the most accurate, no stabilizer unfortunately, but they do 17 armor penetration, so 17 armor damage. Accuracy on these things is not terribly high, but 40% and a 15 armor penetration gun is not bad for a 60-point vehicle. Let's see if there's any alternative that we could consider here. Stay away from the T62 line as always. Their rate of fire is just too low, although the rate of fire from the T55 is only 1 point higher. I'm considering T72A, because the T72A or the T72 line usually has a bit more armor. You can see that they have 13 armor versus 11. Their accuracy is a bit higher. Their rate of fire is the same. Armor penetration is 1 less, and they don't carry an ATGM. So in this case I think that the T55 AMV would be the best option. Then he has 2 cards of the T72B OBR 1987. Nice tanks. Great all-rounders. They're a little bit like the Leopard 2, and I suppose you could compare them to the 2A1 in the sense that they have a nice mix of armor penetration on the gun, accuracy, frontal armor, maneuverability, 700 km autonomy, off-road speed, medium optics, and even an ATGM, which hits for 22 armor penetration. That means that if you're dealing with a super heavy and the main gun is not sufficient to go through, for example, the 22 frontal armor, you can still use the sphere and do go through the frontal armor. I'm not sure, although I would use 8 of these. I think that's a bit much. T72Bs are almost as nice, but you get more of those. So what I'm going to do here is delete 1 card of these T72Bs or the 1987 version, and throw in the T72B. How many times in a minute can you pronounce that name? Anyway, the T72B gets more availability. You get 15 frontal armor versus 18. You get the same gun. They also carry the sphere, but the main difference is that little bit of armor, a little bit of, I was going to say accuracy, but that turns out not to be the case. I think it's just the armor. Really? Are they that similar? Oh well, I'll take it. And then he has PT90s. I'm not sure why he has these in here, because I have found that the BMP 685 is far superior to the PT90. Reason I'm saying that is because this gun has an accuracy of 55% versus 25%. That's a lot higher. You do lack the Malyutka, but with a 40% accuracy and 15 armor penetration, we got enough other units that can do the same job. Like, for example, the Arcans mounted on the BMP-3, and to some extent the Concours mounted on the PMP-2D. So we don't need ATGMs on the PT90. And instead I'll go with my, well, semi-favorite really, the BMP 685. Moving on to Reconnaissance. It's looking a bit light here. 17 units is not that much. He has 1 card of Rozvedkas transported by Mi-24Ds, so more gunships. 7 of these at highest veterancy of Hardened. Looked good to me. BRM 1Ks. These are great spotters, but you don't get a lot of them, and 3 is definitely too few. I'm going to compare these to the BRDM 3. The reason for that is that you do get more BRDMs. As you can see, you get 9 or 13 versus 3 or 4. The difference is good optics versus exceptional, better off-road speed and the advantage of the BRDM-3, and I would say a better gun for the BRDM-3, because I do prefer a faster firing, high accuracy autocannon compared to a can't hit anything 2A28 Grom. But you do get exceptional optics on these. Considering though that this deck is going to be on the move a lot with these transports, I would prefer the BRDM-3, and I know that that means that I don't have an exceptional optics vehicle in here. Not even a very good. If you want to have a very good, you could go for the PT-85, but they're not as mobile. So in this case, I will go for the BRDM-3. It means that I don't have an exceptional spotting vehicle, so be it. I'll live with it. Mi2s do have very good optics, but they're terribly slow at 200 kph. Keep that in mind, as they are not very quick to retreat. Make sure you keep them not too far over enemy territory, insofar as you're not going to get shot down right away as you fly in there though. But keep in mind, these things are not great helicopters. Vehicle wise, he has the TO-62 napalm tank. Great tank. Always have napalm in your deck is my motto. And I do prefer, I think it's the TO-55 here. Let's see. Yeah, there's not a lot of difference here. Now let's go with the TO-62 because it has a bit more frontal armor and is more likely to survive a hit. So TO-62 it is. 9 of these should be well enough. Then he has 18 Concours Jeeps. It's not wrong, it's just not my preference. So what I'm going to do here is throw out one of these, or actually both. And let me explain why. Concours M is a great weapon, but you got access to the Sturm. And the Sturm has more range, which means that it's safer to engage tanks. Their accuracy is a bit higher, their armor penetration is a bit lower, and they are a little bit less maneuverable, 70 or 60 kph versus 70. But that 2800 meter range is significant, and I want to have that on these units. So I'm going to go with one card of 7 Sturms, and then I want to have my napalm tank, which is in here, and the BMPT. It is almost a no-brainer for this situation, for this deck. These things are just so incredibly good at killing off infantry, combined of course with the TO-62, but these have a specific role. They're so incredibly good at killing off infantry that I almost always bring them in my deck if I have room for them. And considering all vehicles in a mechanized deck cost you 1 point, except for this one of course, I do want to have this in here. You even get a bit of availability or experience bonus. So if you want to have more of them, go with hardened, but I think that veteran is enough for me. If you want to have this deck be more maneuverable, if you don't want to do ambushes with a Sturm, you could go with something like the Jjia or the Norov. These two are more maneuverable than the Sturm, don't have to rely as much on stealth and concealment as the Sturm, because the Sturm does not have a lot of armor. They are better at firing faster, 20 rounds a minute for the Jjia, 12 rounds a minute for the Norov. Good amount of armor penetration on both of them, decent accuracy, stabilizers not that good. But these things I feel are a better companion for a fast moving mechanized force like for example the BMPs than something like the Sturm is. So that is one thing that you could change if you want to make a change in this section. Moving on to helicopters. He has the workhorse of the Soviet Air Force, really, the Mi-24P. This is a nice, I suppose you could say mid-price helicopter. Now for Blue 4 it's on the pretty high end, because most Blue 4 helicopters hover, quote unquote, hover around the 80 point price point. In this situation, I think that the Mi-24P with 80 points is relatively cheap for USSR terms, considering that they also have the Mi-28, the Ka-50 and 52s. Anyway, nice amount of rocket pods, decent HEGM, not the best, it's not going to kill high-end super tanks very quickly, but we got the VP for that, which has better missiles. He has a large amount of these, 6 should be enough. You can use these things as overhead escorts for your transports, so keep that in mind. These things are not terribly fast, so what you will have to do is micromanage these to stay near. But if you do, you can engage transports, tanks and other things that might be annoying your infantry at long range, and making sure that your infantry actually arrives to their destination in one piece. Then he has another card of Mi-24P, so I'm going to delete those and get them grouped up again. I know, it's my OCD coming up again. If you want to have cheaper helicopters and don't mind spamming stuff, go with the Mi-24AV or the Mi-24A, the Mi-4A. The difference between these is that the Mi-4A has more higher end rocket pods. They do 2 HE damage because they fire 80mm rockets and they have 80 rockets for those. If you want to fire lower HE, for example at infantry that's out in the open, go with the Mi-4AV because it also has a Malyutka. It's not the best, but it can destroy vehicles and transports reasonably accurately. 40%, 30% stabilized. Keep in mind though, they're dead slow, 180, and that's why I personally stay away from these helicopters. Moving on to the Air Force. What you definitely want to have, if you have this many helicopters, is something that can kill off radar, and he has that in the form of the MiG-25BM. This one will destroy any radar source within a range of 5.2 kilometers off the plane. They have a decent turn radius, good air detection, and keep in mind that this for seaplanes is actually important in the sense that with good air detection you can make sure that if an enemy fighter enters the arena or the area, you can get this plane out before the enemy air superiority fighter gets in range, hopefully. So that's why I always look for good air detection or better on seaplanes. Then he has the Su-27M, very expensive plane, but it can do both long-range air superiority fighting and anti-tank units. It has 4 of these TV-guided fire and forget high-end anti-tank missiles with 30 armor penetration. Keep in mind though, you only get 1. If this thing dies, you're screwed, pretty much. Because you don't get that many high-end AT weapons in this deck overall. We do have the helicopters, we got some on the vehicles, some on the tanks, but not a lot on the infantry. And the infantry has to get very, very close to a super heavy if they want to take it down. So be very careful as you bring in this plane. Always escort it with 1 air superiority fighter and possibly a SEAD if you can get it in. He has 2 of these Su-27PU, so he's gearing very heavily towards warfare where you take down enemy airplanes. I don't think that we really need 2 of these. Because what I'm missing here is a capacity to drop bombs. We don't have any HE, cluster, napalm, whatever kind of bombs you would like to have on your aircraft, so that's what I'm going to spend that last card on. The MiG-29s are always favorite planes of mine to do exactly that. Not only because they look good, but also because they have a decent ECM of 40%. They can actually do dogfighting, and the MiG-29 has an incredibly good turn radius of 250. It's not that it needs that, because it doesn't have any short-range air-to-air missiles, but it is a nice to have, as it means it can make much sharper turns to evac the plane. Both of these carry air-to-air missiles, but the MiG-29M carries them for long-range engagements, 7,000 meters. The MiG-29S for shorter range, pretty much dogfighting. Personally, I would have swapped these missiles around. If you have a turn radius of 250, you can really quickly turn into the back of any air superiority fighter, because there are none that have a turn radius of 250. All of the super air superiority fighters like Eurofighters, Su-27PU, Su-27S to some extent, Rafales, stuff like that, they all have a turn radius of 300. So I think that the R-73 would make more sense on this plane than the R-77. Anyway, I was talking about bombs and got distracted. In this case, I think that a 500 kilogram bomb is the best option that we have. The reason is that a 500 kilogram standard bomb is always going to damage something. A 500 kilogram cluster bomb is not going to damage all everything. It will do, of course, more damage to vehicles and tanks, but it'll do 0 damage to infantry. And if you have some high-end infantry, or for example you spotted an infantry command unit that you want to have dead, you cannot do that with the MiG-29M, but you can do it with the MiG-29S. So that's why I'm going to go with the MiG-29S to add a bit of all-round capacity to this deck. Now, he doesn't have a naval section, so I don't have to go over that. And I think that with this, we have a pretty well-rounded USSR Mechanized deck. Of course, it depends a bit on what kind of terrain you're going into, what kind of gameplay you're going into. I think that this deck is going to do very well, for example, on Asgard in the middle in a 10v10, but I would not bring it in a map like Hop and Glory, where you have the huge desert. It is not a position or a map where this deck is really going to shine, because it has a lot of those transports, which are very easy to pick off by tanks. So in a game like that, I would not recommend Mechanized, but a medium to heavily urbanized area will work for this deck. So, Jjia, I hope that this deck helped you understand how I look at the deck. I hope you understand why I made the changes that I made with the BMP 1D, 2D and BMP 3. And that, and this is really a personal preference of mine, now that I have all of these infantry units split up into subsections, if you will, it's much easier for me to see what you have. You got some AA, or anti-infantry units, you got anti-all-rounder/line infantry, you got ATGMs, and you got man-pads. So it's really a personal preference of mine, but I find that it is much easier to quickly have a look at what you have in your deck by setting it up like this. Anyway, with that, it's the end of the deck review. Hope you liked it. If you want to use this deck, the code for it is in the description down below. Now, some of these codes don't seem to work for people. That might be because your browser copies an additional hyphen. That's the mark next to the 0. If that happens, make sure you delete it manually, and that is usually when the deck code will work. Also, the deck codes of all deck reviews before February 1st, so before DLC 3 hit, have been invalidated. So if you're watching any of those videos later on, keep in mind that you will have to manually rebuild that deck by yourself, as the deck code won't work. Anyway, end of the video, so I thank you for watching. If you have a deck that you want me to review, the link to send it in is in the description down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe the video if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.